If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you probably know that I'm a big fan of the game studio Rare. After all, I've done videos on Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Diddy Kong Racing, etc, etc. So when Playtonic Games first announced Project Yooka-Laylee back in 2015, I knew from that point on that I was eventually going to have to make a video on its development. So here we are, and to do this game justice, I went all out and covered just about everything that I could find, comparing every bit of footage by hand. And thanks to help from Playtonic themselves, especially Gavin Price, the creative lead at Playtonic, this video has become a masterpiece. So grab some snacks and get ready to learn all about the development of Yooka-Laylee. Yooka-Laylee began as a simple idea by a group of former Rare employees who wanted to create a spiritual successor to Banjo-Tooie, and this idea was first announced to the public in September of 2012, with many tweets from the account Minji a boss from Banjo-Tooie itself. This account was comprised of Grant Kirkhope and Stephen Hurst, among others, and was used in order to gauge interest in this spiritual successor. The account's profile does a good job at explaining what that plan was. It said, "Let's make the spiritual successor to Banjo-Tooie. Core members of the original team are ready to go. All we need is your support. Join us today." At this point, very little was decided on by the team as to what this game would be, though a few tweets mentioned some of their initial plans. First, they were thinking it would be a 3D platformer using the Unity game engine, though they made sure to mention that they wouldn't be trying to recreate Banjo, but instead create something entirely new. Back then, there were also some thoughts of using Kickstarter to fund the game's development, as paying for the game was currently a big issue that needed to be worked out. That's one of the reasons why they needed people to spread word about the project, and the people pulled through. Soon after the first announcement, Minji replaced their old Twitter bio with this new one, saying, "We want to make a great game. We asked if you were interested and you all said yes. Now we're working out the whats and the hows." Everything seemed like it was going to work out, but this was the point that it all started to fall apart. The Twitter account was left abandoned after December 20th, 2012, and on April 20th, 2014, Grant Kirkhope was asked on Reddit what happened to this spiritual successor. His response was definitely not what people were hoping for. He said that some of the team that were a part of the project had gotten as far as drawing up characters and even getting a demo level set up, but sadly, the project all fell to bits. Everyone had their own jobs, and it just wasn't going to work out. However, just when all hope was thought lost, some mysterious tweets were made by Minji in late December of 2014, 2 years after the radio silence. People were hoping it would start making sense soon, but it only got stranger. Like how in early February, the page's bio was replaced to this, saying, "You must restart for changes to take effect." It was obvious that something was about to change, and it really did. Soon after this, everything was moved over to a new account under a new name, Playtonic Games, now with an entire website of its own. Those traveling to the site were also given some very interesting information. First off, it revealed the team at the time, which consisted of 6 people. Chris Sutherland, Gavin Price, Steve Males, Jens, Stephen Hurst, and Mark Stevenson. The website also showed off a teaser image of the 2 stars of the game, which at the time was called Project Yooka-Laylee. Playtonic also used their YouTube channel to reveal some more info, this time about the composer of the game. These few short videos showed off one of the most incredible machines to date, Playtonic's Omnipotent Options Processor, or poop. This contraption revealed that Grant Kirkhope, David Wise, and Steve Burke would all be working on the tunes for Project Yooka-Laylee, which sure got people excited. After all, these were big names in the Rare universe, with Grant Kirkhope known for work in Banjo-Kazooie, David Wise with Donkey Kong Country, and Steve Burke for Cameo. So let's move on to March, when the Playtonic team attended EGX Res 2015 to show off their plans for this Project Yooka-Laylee. Some things they mentioned during their panel included the game's main collectible, Pages, as well as the ability to use them either to expand a world or unlock another. The world expansion part was an interesting thing to say the least for Stephen Hurst, the chief environment artist at Playtonic. Because of this little gameplay mechanic, he had to change the way he tackled the world's environment entirely by designing it into modular pieces that could be easily reused around the world. And you can definitely notice that design choice when looking at the worlds in Yooka-Laylee. And speaking of worlds, 2 of them were shown for the first time at this panel, with the first being an early version of Tribalstack Tropics, known then as the Jungle World. While a lot of scenery shown here was used in the final version, something about it just seems different. Oh well, we'll take a look at this a bit more in depth later. The second world shown is more notably different by far. Like, despite a few key points, you probably couldn't even recognize this as an early version of Hivory Towers, the hub world in the final game. Instead of a business setting as the final version has it, this hub world here looks like it was set in an underground cave, while reusing some assets from the jungle world such as the floating platforms. But once again, we'll take a look at this more in depth at a later time. The characters of Project Yooka-Laylee were briefly mentioned as well, and even though very limited info was discussed, they did mention how they were going about designing the characters. Turns out every character in this game was designed so that in the future, they would be able to star in their own game. While these new games weren't actually being planned at the time, they did mention that they were all going to be unique, spanning many different genres, each with their own specially written story. This EGX panel also confirmed Playtonic's plans to start a Kickstarter in order to fund the game's development. While this crowdfunding campaign wasn't initially planned at first, they decided that doing so would be the best option after numerous fan requests to get directly involved with Project Yooka-Laylee. But that wasn't their only reasoning for using this business model. In fact, they were perfectly fine with getting money from investors and funding the game that way, but they knew they couldn't make the game as best it could be with that method of funding. So not only would their Kickstarter make the game exponentially better, but it would also allow them to release their title on all platforms day one. While their original plan was just to release the game on PC, fans kept requesting that they release on other platforms like PS4, Xbox One, Wii U, virtual reality, etc. So the team decided in the end to release on the most requested platforms decided by fans themselves. Plus, this would allow Playtonic the opportunity to create things like amiibos, which some were very adamant to see eventually get released. The last 20 minutes or so of Playtonic's panel was dedicated to questions, and there were a few of them that I found very interesting. First, why now? Why was now the right time for the team to get back together? Well, it turns out that while they've been wanting to do this whole revive a genre thing for a while now, they had to wait for the right people to be available to put the team together. And this team really came together when Chris and Gavin left Rare in 2014, which was around a month after Grant Kirkhope said that the project had fallen to bits. At that point, Chris and Gavin decided to see if they could get everyone back together to make their own game. And a little more than 6 months later, Playtonic Games came to be. Now let's travel to April 30th, 2015, a little over a month after EGX rezzed and 24 hours before the Kickstarter was set to launch. At this time, Playtonic revealed the main characters in Project Yooka-Laylee, Yooka and Laylee. Plus, they also revealed what their game was going to be officially called, Yooka-Laylee. You know, it was such an obvious choice that it actually surprised me, to be honest. The next day, Yooka-Laylee's Kickstarter went live with the goal of £175,000. And 38 minutes later, that goal was successfully funded. Okay, but what about those stretch goals for like local multiplayer or simultaneous day one releases on PS4, Xbox One, and Wii U? Surely they wouldn't be able to raise £1 million that fast. And it did take quite a bit longer, around 21 hours? Obviously it seems that people actually do want a 3D platformer. I mean, in less than 1 day, they already broke Kickstarter's record for the fastest video game campaign to raise over $1 million US. So at this point, what could Playtonic do but add more stretch goals? And so they added things like orchestral music, a GK rap, which is great by the way, check that out. And at £2 million, the largest goal was adding additional DLC that would only be created after release. And believe it or not, they crushed all those goals with a good £90,000 to spare. In the 47 days this campaign was up for, fans raised a total of $2,090,100. 104 pounds. A little over 1.9 million pounds more than they originally asked for. And at the end of this successful Kickstarter campaign, it was official. Yooka-Laylee was set for a simultaneous release on PC, Mac, Linux, PS4, Xbox One, and Wii U, with the release date being projected as sometime in October of 2016. But even though we've reached the end of the campaign, I figure we should compare their promotional video for the Kickstarter, as I know for a fact that there are quite a few differences here. After all, this was shown almost 2 years before release, and the game had only been in solid development for around 3 months at this point. So let's begin. The differences should start about 3 seconds in, with this logo that's quite a bit different from the final. Its colors, letter placement, and stylization all changed, not to mention the removal of the case details and the eyes in the letters. Now, basically there are 2 worlds shown in this trailer, the jungle world and the hub world. But before looking in depth at each, let's begin by seeing some changes that were the same in both worlds. First off, the main collectible here are Playtonic coins, not quills. In the final, these coins were used as collectible objects that would allow you to play Rextro's arcade games, and there's only 1 per world. Also, you should notice that there's no butterfly life counter or power meter in this trailer, despite the fact that the player is seen rolling, which should at least make the power bar appear since the move uses it. Looking at the footage for a while, I noticed that the walking animation is actually pretty strange in this build. Basically, from what I can see, the speed of the character is directly proportional to the walking animation speed. The less you move, the slower the animation. In theory, it all sounds right, but in practice it looks very strange when moving slowly. In the final version, it doesn't work this way. It actually goes a little like this. For the smallest movements, the animation speeds up, then at a certain point it slows back down, and then anything beyond that point speeds it back up again. This makes the movement of the character seem a lot more realistic compared to the old way of doing it in the trailer. Oh, and here's another change involving the fearless duo. Well, actually it's really just Laylee. In short, when using the glide move in this build, Laylee sounds completely different compared to the retail version. Take a listen and compare. The speech box is another change that's found everywhere in this build, and there's quite a few changes with it. The box is bigger, the font is completely different, the dots to show that there's more text are huge, and also the text fades onto the screen instead of popping in at 1 character at a time. Some other changes include no faces next to the words and no voices at all, but I'd assume that those would likely be added in later. Now on to changes specific to the worlds themselves, starting with the jungle. The first obvious difference is basically the layout of the entire world. It's very different in a number of ways, but the biggest has to be the central temple. In fact, there are so many changes here that I couldn't possibly list them all, so let me just give you some of the highlights. First off, thinking in terms of the final game, if you consider the level with Trowser on it as the first level of the temple, then levels 2 and 3 are completely missing. And also in this trailer, we get a nice look at the temple in shaded wireframe mode, in what I assume to be Autodesk Maya. Here we can see a lot more flower pots than what are in the final, as well as an extreme lack of walls along the top of the ramp. It's just not safe. Video footage of this temple also shows no sign of Trowser, though to be honest, I didn't really expect him to be here anyway. In fact, at this point, he may not even have been put in the game at all. There are so many other differences with other parts of the world too, like how the waterfall is always running and not controlled by Nimbo, or how there are ponds that aren't seen in the final, or even how there are moving rock platforms that were replaced with smaller metal ones. I personally think that one of the most interesting differences about this trailer is the jungle world being shown at night, which never happens in the final game. Gavin Price explained to me that this night scene wasn't really anything other than a test, just to see how everything in the jungle would look at night. After doing it for the trailer though, the team actually really liked how it looked, and were planning at one point to link this time-changing mechanic into the world expansion, but that only raised more questions. After all, in order to add this time change in, you'd have to place current NPCs in new locations, remove some, and even create entirely new ones too. Figuring out how to accomplish all that would have been so much more trouble than it's worth, and thusly the time system was scrapped. Some NPCs in the jungle world changed as well, like that darn planker, who doesn't have any animations, isn't on top of the temple where he belongs, and says a line that isn't in the game at all to my knowledge, though it looks like he's still a pompous jerk even this early on. Something interesting to note is the flower that's right next to him. What was originally just a flower in the trailer became an NPC later on in development. It kinda feels like the team took a look at the flower, shoved some eyes on it, and thought, sure, why not? Good old Rare, or Playtonic. The other stage shown in this trailer is the original hub world that seems to be taking place in an underground lair of some kind. It's got everything you need for a villainous hub world. Enemies, pipes with undisclosed green liquid pouring out of them, plus some fire and collectibles just to spice things up. Needless to say, besides the pipes and some books, there isn't really a whole lot that I can even compare to Ivory Towers, the final hub world, though much of the environment in this early version seems to have come from the trailer's jungle world. Whether reusing those pieces was an intentional design choice or just a temporary thing is unknown at this point. Some concept art from around the same time shows us what the original Grand Tome for the jungle world was going to look like in this early hub world. From what I can see, it seems like Yooka and Laylee were going to jump into the Grand Tome, much like jumping into a painting in Super Mario 64, instead of like in the final game where they're basically swallowed by the book. Not to mention, this whole area looks just like the rest of the world, meaning it doesn't look anything like the final game's hub. Honestly, what is up with this whole place? Well, I asked Gavin myself, and here was his answer to the question, which honestly is a lot more cryptic than I was expecting. He said, and I quote, "All I'll say is it was initially the core hub theme, but Ivory Towers was created once the main villains were more defined. That's not to say this subterranean area isn't relevant in the future though. Interesting, is it not? Color me intrigued." There is one object in this world that I'd like to explain though, this rotating thingy. At first I thought it was an early version of Corporate Security, the laser shooting sentry robot, but that's not it at all. Gavin tells me that it's an early hub world asset that was simply created for testing purposes. From what he could remember, it simply rotated around and shot flames in 4 directions, and with much of the world around it, this obstacle was never used in the end. 4 days after the Kickstarter began, Steve Mails was interviewed by the writer who was posting on Playtonic's official website. In it, he answers some rather interesting questions, the most interesting one being the names Yooka and Laylee. Why were those decided on? Well, a few reasons, with probably the most obvious being that it combined into the name Yooka-Laylee quite well, but something you may not know is what each part means in Hawaiian. For Yooka, it means small-brained person, and for Laylee, it means to fly, which is pretty fitting for each of these characters. Originally though, there was an idea of having the taller half of the duo characters, or Yooka, be a tiger instead of a chameleon. However, it never got past the sketch phase as the animal seemed too much like a hero. In past games that Steve worked on, his heroes didn't look like heroes. They were underdogs, and he wanted to capture the same thing in Yooka-Laylee. For Laylee specifically, there's an interesting piece of info about her in this interview. When deciding how she would hang around Yooka, they kept constantly going back to that good old backpack from Banjo-Kazooie. But feeling like they couldn't use that again, they decided to adapt Yooka's head crest in order to allow Laylee to hang on it. Yooka's design wasn't just altered for Laylee though. He went through a lot of wardrobe changes too throughout his design phase. Shoes, a hoodie, pants, gloves, knee pads, leg warmers, it didn't matter. You just couldn't get him to look right with any of those on. In the end, because of this and the fact that they were going to be adding the camo move later in development, they just decided to have him completely nude. I wonder how they got that past the ESRB. Probably bribed them. Chris Sutherland, programmer and voice actor extraordinaire, also got his time in the sun with an official Playtonic interview on May 21st, 20 days into the Kickstarter campaign. First, he discussed how development of Yooka-Laylee started. Turns out it all began with a simple cube running around in a Unity scene, to which he just kept adding in moves even without the character models. After all, as he said, if you can be entertained by moving a cube, then you are going to stoke up the fun levels even more after replacing it with a bat and chameleon. And speaking of that bat and chameleon, Chris also did the voices for the duo and discussed in this interview how he came up with them. Turns out Laylee was the first one to be created, and it came about rather quickly. Yooka, on the other hand, not so much. Even at the time this interview was written, they were still making revisions to Yooka's voice. I mean, as Chris said, it's difficult to create those gibberish type voices. After all, you've got to condense an entire character's personality into just a few sound samples. It looks like a lot of work went into making all of these characters sound just right, even if some of them are just a bunch of burps. Almost 1 month into the Kickstarter campaign, Playtonic revealed their new collectibles, Ghost Riders. These grabbable ghouls were once the writers of the book worlds, but then they died, which probably sucked for them. So, as the intrepid heroes you are, it's your job to free all 5 spirits for a special prize. But originally there weren't 5 of these ghosts, only 1. However, as Steve Mails designed some thumbnails for this collectible creature, and by some, I mean he designed over 50, he thought to himself, hey, why not have 5 ghosts, each with their own abilities? And that is literally exactly what they did. Around the time of this reveal, I actually had my own interview with the folks at Playtonic Games and posted it up on my channel, which, by the way, if you'd like to check out in full, click the I or the link in the description. Anywho, there's a few interesting points in this interview that I'd like to talk with you about, like how the name Playtonic came to be. Gavin explained that roughly 4 years before the company was formed, he was trying to come up with a name he could call a future company, and because he loved making games, a platonic kind of love, he thought of calling the company Playtonic Games. And plus, it doubles as a great drink name, the Playtonic. Also, remember how I said Chris started out Yooka-Laylee by creating a simple cube running around in a Unity scene? Well, as I learned in this interview, that demo was actually created within 2 hours of the company starting. An incredible feat, since he wouldn't be using the built-in character controller in Unity, and as I personally know, making a third-person platforming character controller from scratch takes a lot of time to get just right. Impressive. Hey, Chris. Impressive. In this interview, they mentioned some things they wanted to add to Yooka-Laylee that couldn't be added in Banjo-Kazooie or Banjo-Tooie. One of those was Bottle's Revenge, since it was totally all Gavin's fault for battering that mode too much and getting it cut from Tooie. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Thankfully though, they made up for it and added a similar mode in Yooka-Laylee, but it's not exactly the same. Instead of using Bottle's Ghost to control enemies like in Tooie, the second player becomes the B team and helps out the first player by picking up collectibles, storing butterflies, and stopping some traps. So same general idea, but different implementation. Now here's something I find very interesting. Steve Mails, the creator of Yooka-Laylee, mentioned that he was considering making the duo a more specific kind of animal besides a simple chameleon and bat, since after all, his previous characters were very specific. Like how Banjo was a honey bear and Kazooie was a red-crested breagle. In his exact words, he said, "We need fancy names rather than bat and chameleon, that's for sure." But that never happened. They're still just simply a chameleon and bat, nothing special. Well, except for the ability to walk on 2 legs and talk. I mean, I guess that's something. Now, why a bat and chameleon? What's so special about these specific animals? Well, as Gavin mentioned, it was all about gameplay possibilities that the animals would provide. With a chameleon, you could have tongue-related abilities or blend in with your surroundings, 2 moves that definitely made it into the final game. And for bats, you've got flying and sonar stuff, which are also used. Basically, they were trying to not go the same route as the Banjo series. I mean, Banjo didn't really have any bear-related moves, and last I checked, birds don't shoot eggs out of their mouth. I mean, I don't think so. Okay, Google, do birds shoot? Another thing that was planned to change from Banjo-Kazooie was having enemies that are more than just distractions. They wanted ones that felt alive in the worlds they were a part of, with all of them working together just to stop you. And they were hoping to use group behaviorisms to accomplish this. Plus, those various collectibles that were ever so prevalent in games like Donkey Kong 64 were going to be streamlined, as they put it. Basically, they were going to have multiple moves that borrowed from the same collectible, instead of having like a billion different eggs, like in Tooie. They did this in Yooka-Laylee by creating the power meter that almost every move borrows energy from, and by waiting it out or collecting butterflies, you can refill that meter for the moves. Plus, butterflies also act as health if you eat them, which streamlines the collectible system even more. Okay, let's head to July 30th, 2015, when Playtonic announced a big move, partnering with Team 17 to assist with development in specific areas of Yooka-Laylee. This would allow Playtonic to completely focus on making the game as best it could be, while Team 17 would be handling the business side of things as well as other various jobs. In the same announcement, they made sure to reiterate that there were no plans for a physical release of the game. Digital would be the focus for all platforms, and any kind of physical release wasn't even on the table. But as we know now, it did indeed happen, thanks to Team 17 publishing the game and bringing a box release to PS4 and Xbox One. So it turns out this partnership was actually more beneficial than many originally thought it would be. A little over 2 months later in October, Playtonic added another update to their site, revealing a brand new character, this lady. At this point, she didn't have a name, but eventually she became Clara, the explorer who always seems to have a bone to pick with the local communities. But as you can tell, she definitely went through some iterations since this piece of concept art. She lost her ponytail and gained an explorer hat, she changed out her skirt for an explorer outfit, and plus, she got untied from that darn stick, and instead was put into a pot. Now it's December, and people are expecting to hear about the Yooka-Laylee toy box experience, that little present to those who donated enough to the Kickstarter campaign. It would allow the player to get a feel for the game without the fear of being spoiled, since it takes place in its own little world completely separate from the game's storyline. Originally, this demo was set to be given out around Q4 2015, but the Playtonic team ran into some issues on how to release it. See, at first it was going to be playable via Unity's web-based player, so all you'd have to do was log into the website and then you'd be able to play the game on pretty much any computer's web browser. Now, you might be wondering how well that would even run. After all, the Unity web player is very limited in processing power. But originally, the toy box was only going to include a single room to explore, so it definitely could have been possible. But as they went along developing it, they decided it would be better to increase the size and scope of the toy box in order to create a really cool world for the player to explore. But in doing that, it would definitely make the Unity web player, as they put it, impractical. So in order to get enough time to increase the demo's content and find a new way to distribute the toy box, they had to delay its release till early 2016. Though technically it didn't come out in early 2016 either, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Let's fast forward to May 20th, 2016, when Playtonic posted a huge update on Yooka-Laylee. Among all the announcements, they revealed a few new characters, such as the cunning capitalistic crusader Capital B, who's been stealing all the world's books in order to make pure profit. So evil. Not to mention his lair, and the new hub world, Hivory Towers. There were also some other various announcements too, like the final collectibles, the existence of tonics that can change gameplay, Dr. Puzz and her former colleague Dr. Quack, and not to mention this image, which eventually became the promotional art for basically everything from the Steam page to the box art, though depending on where you look, there could be some minor changes to this original art. Less than a month later, we find ourselves at E3 2016, a big time for Yooka-Laylee. There, Playtonic revealed the first gameplay footage seen of the game in over a year, and finally confirmed its release date. But sadly, the October release fans were expecting wasn't going to happen. Instead, the game was set to release in Q1 2017, a few months later than expected. The team wanted to take this extra time to really polish the game and deliver the best results they could to the literal tens of thousands of fans who've shown them support throughout development thus far. Now, what about that gameplay they showed? Any changes in it? Oh yeah, a heck of a lot. I think literally every second of that trailer changed in some way or another. So let's just dive right in, shall we? Let's start with Batship Crazy, where you begin the game. Here, the first thing I noticed are the butterflies. They're a completely different color, orange instead of purple. And speaking of different colors, these barrels and crates are painted green and purple in the trailer, but not in the final version. And not only that, there's more of these crates and barrels in the trailer as well. Plus, continuing on the topic of color, these planks are painted rather roughly in the trailer, but became all nice and smooth for the final release. Oh, and also just FYI, the ramp near the ship is missing rocks on the left as well as a barrel. Now let's head to the first world, Tribalstack Tropics, and start by heading to Clara, our skeleton friend now sporting her final design. The only big difference you should notice is that the enemies here are using the generic design of a typical corporate minion. Turns out that this generic design is used for all corporate minions in every world in this trailer, instead of having a specific design for every world like in the retail release. In that same general area, you'll meet that Shovel Knight guy that you'll need to collect a jewel for, but at this point, Shovel Knight wasn't even revealed to be in this game, so all we get is a small glimpse of the jewel that you need to collect. Though if I'm mentioning it, there's probably going to be some changes. And there are a couple. First is the incredibly generic crosshairs used to aim and shoot at the jewel. This was replaced by a much better stylized version in the final. And also, those flowers you see on the foliage? Scrapped from the final. You know, the first thing I did when I entered this world was talk with Nimble, the racing cloud. So let's see how much she changed. Oh, well that's different. She's pink, huh? It doesn't even look like she has a helmet. How unsafe. Looking around on the internet, I actually found an early talking sprite of this version of Nimble, who is apparently wearing a bow on her head in the footage. I would assume they changed Nimble's look in the end to resemble Nimbo a little bit more. After all, he's her uncle, and so there's got to be some family resemblance. The environment shown around here changed as well. The plant life to the left of the first gate was altered, and the butterflies were moved further down the track compared to that good old final version. One other thing I really want to mention are the gates themselves. If you look at the gate that comes up next, you can see that they were originally going for an invisible look, but the retail has it where it's just slightly transparent. And also, when going through one of these early gates, they don't fade out as they would eventually do. Instead, they just pop out of existence. Now, what about Nimbo? He's got his fair share of footage in this trailer, so what changes does he have? First off, as with a lot of areas of Tribalstack Tropics, a bunch of small flowers were removed, and you can see the effects here as well. Nimbo's area definitely has some more interesting changes too, like how the steps to Nimbo have different patterns on them, and not to mention that path back there. Originally, as shown in the trailer, there was no gate to block the area behind it, and not only that, the area that is behind it is entirely different too. In the final version, there's a door that leads you to the bottom of the mountain, so you can go up and down with ease after you open the gate. In this version though, it looks like there's a whole nother area back there. Thankfully, Gavin explained to me what that area was. Turns out it was originally going to be a viewing platform to other areas of the level. However, during playtesting, they realized they needed a quick way to get back and forth between Nimbo and the level below, so the gate and doors were added in instead, both here in the screenshot and below near the pool. High above the map in Tribalstack Tropics is a loose cannon by the name of Blast2. When you meet him, he'll ask you for your help to give some of his friends some presents, which is code for let's shoot some cannonballs at these Mr. Blowies, who've changed so dramatically that they don't even look the same. These early Mr. Blowies are seen all over the place in the trailer, and were all replaced with this final model. Before moving on though, there's some differences exclusive to this scene. First off, there's no fan at the bottom of the Mr. Blowies and no top part either, and more importantly, this bush isn't in the final. One place where you see these Mr. Blowies a lot in the trailer is during the minecart challenge with Cardos. There are two scenes that show gameplay of this challenge. Really though, the only change here is some missing jewels in both scenes, which you can see here, and as with most of the gameplay we've seen, there's some missing flowers too. Oh, and that guy's missing as well. Huh, can't believe I almost missed that. Now, up there in the sky is that easy peasy gliding challenge that you've got to complete in order to rescue that Pagey and a Cagey. One thing that I found particularly interesting is that the platforms are in a slightly invisible state until you pass through the ring, which will in turn make that platform solid and the next platform show up in the same invisible state. This whole invisible thing was removed from the final release here, and instead all platforms are visible and solid from the start, no matter if you pass through the rings or not. Now, what about that transformation Dr. Puzz gives you in the world? It's shown in the trailer, so we've got to cover it. Though before we do that, we've obviously got to collect the Molecule. That's the only way that you can activate the DN Ray. Duh. Luckily, that collection is part of the trailer too. Comparing these two versions, notice how the quills are placed. They're all bunched up in the trailer, only appearing after the last moving platform, and in the final, they're all spread out. Also notice how there's a corporate drone just hanging around up here in the trailer, even though he's never found anywhere near here in the retail version. In this part of the trailer, we can also see the world from a good vantage point, so there's even more differences than just those two. This pink tree was the first thing that stood out to me. It's like a bunch of puffballs in the final, but more like a normal tree in the trailer. Those rocks back there also seem to have went through some revisions before release. Okay, now that we have the molecule, let's transform. This part of the trailer is very interesting to me, as originally, you weren't asked if you wanted to transform when you stepped on the platform. Instead, the transformation just happened when you jumped into that blue and purple swirl. Oh, and also, missing flowers. Now, I feel like we've seen enough of Tribalstack Tropics at this point. So let's head to Ivory Towers, and even though we only get to see a couple clips of this place, as expected, there's a lot of differences in each one. First, let's check out Rexstro's arcade game, where Rexstro is jumping around in a completely different location, and not to mention those arcade machines. Ironically, the first thing I notice is this small little change on the joystick, being gray in the trailer instead of red. It's funny though, turns out the last thing I noticed in the arcade was that the press start screen just above the joystick changed. But those two small differences aren't the only changes I found. The top graphic on the machine is completely different, much simpler in comparison to the final. And the last but certainly not least change is the fact that the entire arcade is flipped, in a way. I mean, in the trailer, the machines in the back are blue on the right and orange on the left, but the final has them the other way. Plus, the machines closer to the front have blue on the left and orange on the right, which was once again flipped in the final. Why this change was made, I don't quite know. Perhaps they just liked it better this way. Right next to Rexstro and Ivory Towers is the library, and the trailer shows Yooka and Laylee in the library walking right past a corporate security thanks to their invisibility move. That's the thing though, there is no corporate security at this part in the final game. And not only that, the lighting in this area also changed as well, with it being more of an orange glow in the retail release due to the fact that the environment is relying more on the torches to light the area compared to the builds shown in the trailer. Also, looking in the background, you can see different books on the shelves too. And if you look at the foreground, it seems to be missing that honeycomb-like glass panel from the final, which could mean one of two things. One, you could jump onto those lower shelves anywhere at first, instead of having to specifically enter through this door, or two, the glass is there but invisible to the camera. Around the same area is a bridge with Mr. Blowies that won't allow Yooka and Laylee to pass unless they learn the move that allows them to eat those cannonballs, which incidentally changed a lot. In the trailer, they're a lighter color, not as shiny, missing an outline, and don't come back to Yooka when he eats them. Take a look at it in slow motion and you'll see what I mean. Also, the grass near these cannonballs aren't as detailed in the trailer, and the fog is a lot thinner in that build too. Much like the library, the final's lighting here also relies more on the torches compared to the trailer build, making the lighting look more orange. But that's not all. There's also some missing windows above the door too, which were replaced with that green emblem. The Winter World Glitter Glaze Glacier also got a decent portion of this trailer's runtime, so we've got to take a look at it, starting with this icy path that can only be traversed if you've eaten fire, or at least until you light all of the fire pots. And from what I can see, they're all lit in the trailer, so it's fine that Yooka and Laylee aren't on fire. There's also some actual changes here though, like this platform, which is covered with snow in the final, but looks a lot like the starting pad in the trailer. That area on the bottom right also changed quite a bit, and plus this whole area in the trailer got a lot less foggier throughout development, from what I can see. One thing you may have noticed is that there are no enemies in this place, though it is possible that they've just all been defeated, or more likely, they just weren't present for this trailer. Speaking of enemies, this Corplet Punisher, which is shown somewhere near Dr. Puzz, doesn't exist in this area at all. But that sure isn't as interesting as the next scene, which shows Laylee using her move Sonar Splosion. Basically, this move shoots out a huge sound wave, utterly destroying waves of enemies in one go. But this move looks to be a bit unfinished. I mean, Laylee doesn't even have that jumping animation that's used after executing the move in the final. The world around here changed too, with the most obvious difference being that the enemies, which as I said before, are using the generic enemy model instead of the world-specific one. Beyond that though, those igloos changed a lot too, with a hallway-like thing leading to what's already a different door to the central portion of the igloo. Oh, and as I was writing this part of the script, I noticed that one of those enemies is wearing a hat that is never seen on a minion in the retail build. I was meaning to talk about it later, but since it's here, why not talk about it now? Okay, so this enemy is known as a leader corplet. It takes 2 hits before it can be defeated because, you know, it's a leader and stronger. Obviously, for anyone who's played Yooka-Laylee, that's the same as the final game. But the hat is really where the differences start showing up. Notice how this specific enemy is wearing a cowboy hat instead of the typical leader hat from the retail version. Now that's not the only removed hat for leader corplets, and as Gavin explained to me, the reason for this change in apparel is that all these hats were meant to just be test hats. Simple as that. They were never planned to be used on corplets, but these hats didn't just come from anywhere though. They're actually scaled down versions of Glacier Snowman hats that are still used in the final game. In the end, these smaller hats were all replaced with the default leader hat. Well, that's not entirely true. The shrunken test hat from the classy Snowman was eventually given to the Duke, and plus the naked Snowman's pair of pants found themselves on an actual leader corplet in the final game, though it is possible that you've never seen them that way. Basically, the team thought that the pants test hat looked hilarious on a leader corplet, so they kept it in the retail version, only having it appear a small percentage of the time, so it is possible to get through the whole game without even seeing it once, which is exactly what happened to me. Now, this screenshot, which I assume to be taken around the same time as the E3 trailer, shows off one of those leader corplets with pants on their head. But that's not what I want you all to be paying attention to. Instead, check out Clara. Despite being outside the pot in the final game, in this screenshot, it shows her being cooked again. That's not supposed to happen outside World 1. Thank goodness the dev team got her out of there in time. Whew. Honestly though, I think they made this change in order to keep two back-to-back worlds from having the same objective, which keeps things from getting stale. So that's the end of the trailer. Oh wait, no it's not. There's still a little ending part, which eventually became the intro of the game. This is where the last few changes can be found. First, the one book is missing, likely to keep from spoiling any part of the story, and also the Jiggy and the drink was removed too. Possible copyright issues? Yeah, perhaps. But there isn't just some removed items in the scene though, there's also a few additional things too, like an extra pair of underwear on the Pants magazine, and an extra pair of sunglasses for Laylee, since she wanted to protect her retinas too. Smart Laylee, real smart. Hey, we're halfway through the video now, round of applause, hey! At this point, I'd like to introduce a new segment featuring a special guest. I like to call it Grant Kirkhope's Relaxing Retro Parlor. Take it away, Grant.
Hello everyone, congrats on making it halfway through the video. Now, feel free to go and grab some snacks, maybe a spot of Earl Grey, and relax to the soothing sounds of Treasure Trove Cove. We'll be back with more video momentarily.
Now wasn't that relaxing? Alright, let's get back to the video. With E3 2016 over and done with, only a little more than a month passed before the next big announcement. The toy box was now ready for release, and immediately after the announcement was posted up on July 28th, backers managed to get their hands on the spoiler-free platforming sandbox demo. That is, after some installing issues were resolved on Steam. And now it's time to look at another trailer, this time for Gamescom 2016, which was shown off just a few weeks after the toy box's release. Once again, we've got quite a few differences here, and in order to shorten it a bit more this time, I'm going to skip over changes that we've already talked about when we looked at the E3 2016 trailer, as some of those differences were carried over into this Gamescom build. Alright, let's get to it. Stop right there. Let's start with this clip of Capital B's glorious golden statue. There's a couple of things missing in this area here. First off, there's no roadblocks on the floor, though it is possible they could have been broken by the player, and in much the same way, the fire in this furnace is also missing, though some might say that it's possible for the player to have put it out earlier using the hidden water plant behind the statue. However, I don't think that's the case. Why? Because the water plant isn't in this build. Instead, as you can see in this next scene, there's actually a corplet security there instead, and underneath the metal grates, there's even some regular corplets that aren't supposed to be there either. What's interesting though is that it's sometimes the corplets that are on top of the grate, and the corplet security is nowhere to be found. It all just depends on what part of the trailer that you're looking at. There's a couple more changes in this area of the game too, like how there's no water coming out of the pipes, the fact that this green glow is missing, or how there are no books in the furnace either, which you should be able to see because the fire is out. Moving to the area right outside Ivory Towers, we get a quick glimpse of these eyeball enemies, which attach to objects in order to attack you. But here's the thing, they aren't supposed to be here. The only enemies around the entrance are regular corplets, And plus, the barrel shown in the trailer that the eye's attached to shouldn't be in this area either.
Oh, and there's also an additional pipe on the left in the final. Just thought you'd like to know.
Now let's head back inside to the area right next to the Grand Tome for Tribalstack Tropics, which has one change that I find fairly interesting. Look at that cagey holding that pagey. Notice how tall it is, very different from the wider cages in the final. This change is the same throughout all of this trailer, as well as many other videos we'll be taking a look at later. Moving on, this underwater portion in Ivory Towers has an interesting sound difference. Just take a listen and compare, it should be fairly obvious. The next clip we'll look at is right outside the library. Here you can see another one of those test hats that we talked about earlier. This one has an oil pot-like thing on its head, but once again it was only meant for testing purposes and was replaced with the final leader hat. Oh, and by the way, these normal corplets shouldn't be over here anyway. This is where the corplet drones are supposed to be, and the regular corplets were moved closer to the machines back there. Now, why don't we take a look at the area that surrounds the third world of the game? This area changed quite a bit, and when you compare it to the retail release, you can find a number of differences. First off, it's missing a lot of its surrounding scenery and the lighting effects that make the area look as cool as it does in the final. Plus, that tongue grip that's in front of Yooka-Laylee has a red glowing outline instead of a white one. And once they get up there, you'll notice that bridge and corplet security, both of which aren't here in the final game. Eventually, you'll get to the top of Ivory Towers and find my favorite area of the game's hub world. And lucky for us, we can find some more changes here too, like this extra book to help the player jump onto this moving platform.
Plus, there's all this. There's a whole lot of changes with this. And not to mention, the whole area has also been changed to have a darker atmosphere with harder shadows and a whole new skybox to accompany this change. This screenshot specifically also shows a different floor and a different tree there.
But Ivory Towers isn't the only thing shown in this trailer. No. We also get to see some new views of both Tribalstack Tropics and Glitterglaze Glacier as well. First, let's take a look at Tribalstack Tropics' boss, the Great Rampo. Truly, the most fearsome boss that Yooka-Laylee have ever encountered. After all, jumping over those logs at that camera angle, that's not the easiest thing in the world. But what if I told you that the boss battle wasn't originally going to be like this? If this trailer is anything to go by, at first the camera angle was going to be behind the player instead of above them, and instead of jumping over logs, you dodged flames, at least in this clip. It is possible that the attack sequence shown here just didn't include the logs, since the hole that they come out of in the final is still in the trailer. Oh, and speaking of holes, the hole that the fire comes out of in the clip we saw is still in the final game, just sitting there, unused. But that's still not all. There's a couple more changes here too, like how Rampo is missing some spikes that should be behind him, some thorns that should be around him, and not only that, there's some weird glow on him too. It's not in the retail version, and I don't know where it comes from. In this trailer, we also get a nice look at the minecart challenge for Glitterglaze Glacier in a couple of different parts. The first one shows us, as expected, a different placement for the gems, but there's also two extra corplet drones right next to each other over here too. For the next part, it's the same way. There's a different placement for the gems, but this time there's a drone where a barrel is found in the final.
And also, there's some drones in the background too, even though they aren't on the track and thusly unreachable. So I guess they were just meant for decoration in this version of the challenge and ultimately removed in the end.
Now before we move on, there's something interesting I should mention. In this trailer, you may have noticed that there are no orange gems on the track. That's because this Gamescom build has no orange gems at all. And that fact will remain the same as we keep looking at footage from this build of the game. Believe it or not, this trailer actually shows almost the entire intro sequence from the final game, cut into parts and moved around. And as you've probably expected, there's quite a few differences in each and every clip, and I think it's high time we check them out. The first one shows Capital B with a different camera angle that was never used in the cutscene, while the next one is a bunch of books moving through a pipe. In this clip, the cover that goes over the pipes in the back is completely missing, and so is the yellow stripe on the wall here.
Plus, it seems they moved the spotlight from highlighting the books, like in the Gamescom build, to highlighting the pipe's end, which is smart, because that's where you're supposed to be focusing your attention, and thusly you want the light to shine there.
And for the next part, we've also got some books flowing through a transparent pipe, but that's not the part that changed. Instead, it's the bunch of letters bouncing around here. In this trailer, the letters seem to only bounce on a single thin path, but the final has them bouncing all over the place inside the container. And you've probably already noticed this, but the glass panel on the container is much brighter in the Gamescom version compared to the final, due to some lighting changes that happened between the two builds. And in the next part, if you look closely at the same letters, you'll notice that there's actually a slight mistake that was made because of their placement. Look right here. See how the letters on the left are clipping through the container's wall? Obviously, that was not meant to happen and is only because they moved the letters too far to the right. But that's not all the differences in this clip. That moving platform up there, while it actually is in the level when you're playing it, it was removed specifically from the final cutscene, likely to keep it from obscuring the statue. And behind that statue, there's a missing piece to the metal walkway, missing green decor on the bottom of the statue, a missing pipe, and plus the entire Vice President statue is missing too. Poor Dr. Quack. Not to mention the lighting changed quite a bit. Here, take a closer look. Okay, now for the last part of the trailer, which shows a zoomed out view of outside Hivory Towers, and oh boy, there's a lot of changes here too. The most obvious one being the missing sign that states what the building is, Hivory Towers, and with it the security camera that's underneath. Not only that, there are several pipes missing, including the ones below the sign, and if you move out a bit, the pipe on the right, and the slightly less visible pipe on the left. And if you zoom out even more, you get some more differences too. Like the whole rock formation on the left, some additional bushes, and not to mention tons of additional trees, which all changed before release. The book sucker system changed a lot too. Actually, no, that's probably not its real name. The building on the hill changed a lot too. Like how the canister on the left was changed from red to blue, the pipes got an additional white color in the final version, the towers happen to be the same height in the trailer unlike the final, and plus, there's a big green emblem on the center of the building that was added in between the trailer and the retail release. Plus, the book sucker itself is actually sucking books. But assuming that this is the same scene as the final intro, which it should be, I mean it's got the same camera movement and everything, the book sucker shouldn't have been turned on yet. Interesting. Oh, and one last thing, the skybox changed too, making the scene look a lot sunnier, like a nice bright afternoon, free from any possible evil schemes. And that's it for that 1.5 minute trailer. But are we done yet? Oh, no. We've got some gameplay to look at too. 6 minutes in fact from the same build as the trailer. So let's jump right in, shall we? First off, there's some general differences here, like a complete lack of music. That's right, there's no music in this demo at all. Plus, as expected of the demo, the grand tome that allows the player to leave the world is missing too. And in its place, there's some quills around the area where it shouldn't technically be. Also, just below the start of the world is the hidden area where the first Ghost Rider is hiding. And even though we don't get to see if it's actually there in the build because the gameplay doesn't show it, we can see a removed pillar on the way back up to the starting platform. Heading to the temple, you probably are expecting to see Trowser and his incredible deals awaiting you. Well, you'd be disappointed because Trowser is nowhere to be found in this build. I expect it's due to the same reason the Grand Tome is missing. I mean, after all, this is just a demo, and technically you have all the moves that you need from the start anyway. The totem that's supposed to be near Trowser is still here though, so let's see what changes he's got to offer. Well, it does look like he's brighter when asleep compared to the final, and plus, he's missing an outline too. Not to mention, the animation when waking up is really basic in this build, only having his eyes open instead of moving around like he would eventually do. Now, since we woke up the totem, the platform to reach the second level is now visible and ready to use. It'll actually bring us to an enemy with one of those test hats, but what's interesting about this is the fact that there are no corpulent leaders on this floor in the retail build. Instead, it's just a bunch of regular corpulents ready to be defeated on your way to the Molecool, which you still need to collect for Dr. Puzz. And actually, once you collect it in this version, the camera will pan down to Dr. Puzz like normal, but land on an angle that's noticeably different from the final game. At this point, why don't we check up on Clara? Yep, it looks like she's still being cooked alive, so that's normal. But it seems like the fire plant here is at a different location, and there's an extreme lack of barrels and crates here too. Not to mention, the conversation with Clara is also slightly different, with some of the POTS lines being said by Laylee instead. Take a look. Another character around here is our good friend Sir Scoffs-a-Lot. But it's not quite the character that changed, but instead what's said when the heroes first encounter him. Along with some various differences, Laylee is just way more insulting. Here, see for yourself. Hey, how about we head to Nimbo now? We haven't seen him in quite a while after all. But to get up there at this point, we're going to have to take the scenic route. On the way there, there's an interesting discrepancy I noticed in the gameplay. Turns out the entrance at the foot of the monument is locked up with a gate, and this gate is never seen in the final. However, you perceptive viewers may say that this is the early way of locking up the entrance. After all, in the final, the entrance doesn't appear until you expand the world. So maybe instead of just making it appear, they were originally going to lock it up and unlock it after the world expanded. And to that I say, probably not. After all, the world is already expanded in this gameplay since Nimbo and the whole top of the monument are visitable. My thought is this, and it's a bit underwhelming, but I think it's just locked up because this is a demo and they weren't ready to show off what's inside. Over the years, I've learned that the simplest answer is usually the right one in the end, and I think that's the case here. Oh, and also, that rock there was replaced with two much cooler looking totems that perfectly match the entrance to the monument. But anyway, now that we're here with Nimbo, hey Nimbo, let's take a look at some of these changes. First off, there's actually 3 quills per plant in this build instead of 1, and they're also placed differently as well. Plus, in this gameplay specifically, you can see the player using water in order to make Nimbo rain, which shows us 4 changes. 1. The particle system used for the water coming out of Yooka's mouth was altered in order to make it look like a flow of water rather than a bunch of rain. 2. There's a different camera angle when changing Nimbo's weather pattern. 3. There's no cutscene showing the world after it's changed. And 4. There's an extra line that Laylee says when they make Nimbo start raining, which makes that rain a lot more, questionable. Now that we've hung out with Nimbo some, let's talk with Cardos and check out his track once again. This time though, it's mostly the same besides some changes that we've already talked about. But still, there are some new changes that we should highlight. First, there's a big lack of gems on the first hill. And not to mention, there are also a few barrels that were added in later, like this one. And these two. And speaking of barrels, at the end of this track, there are actually a big lack of them here, which makes them slightly easier to jump over compared to the retail release. Also, another interesting change I noticed happens only when hitting flames in this build. Turns out doing so will actually take away some health from the player, though that doesn't happen in the final version. And thank goodness it doesn't, because I would have died so many times if it did. But even though you may lose health, you don't lose any gems from hitting flames or barrels in this Gamescom build, which does make this minecart challenge a lot easier, it seems. Wow, I think that's enough footage comparison for now. Wait, what? Playtonic released another trailer a month later? Oh boy, let's check this one out then. Alright, this is the trailer that showed off a bunch of Yooka-Laylee's characters and revealed Shovel Knight's unexpected cameo in the game. Interesting fact, that model of Shovel Knight as well as his voice were all provided by Yacht Club, the creator of this Warriors fantastic game. Now let's start looking at the trailer in more detail, shall we? Starting again with Batship Crazy. You'll find a simple additional pot here on the ship, but interestingly enough, after a quick cut, it's disappeared completely. This could mean one of two things. They either took footage for this trailer over multiple builds, or the player could have just destroyed that single pot in between takes. Also, you should notice that all the treasure chests on the ship are missing, which once again could be because the player destroyed every one of them, or more likely, they were just not there at this point. A little bit later in the trailer, we get another look at this duo on their pirate ship home, and off there in the distance, it turns out there's another changed look for the Booksucker building place thingy. Overlooking the changes we've already talked about, notice how the container and the Booksucker are both white. which is a bit strange for the sucker, because the Gamescom 2016 trailer we saw earlier showed it with the correct final color, but it looks like they changed it to white in this build and then changed it back before release. So at this point, I say we take a rapid fire look at the rest of the characters in this trailer to see what differences they have. Ready, set, go. First up, Capital B's clip. In it, the first thing I notice is how his cape-like apparel moves less like a cape in the trailer and more like a jacket. And not only that, Dr. Quack is missing, as this is the same cutscene as the intro of the game, though it's very likely he was just removed for the trailer as he appears later on his own. Speaking of which, Dr. Quack's scene is from its quiz times, though the environment is slightly different as the honeycomb-shaped wall behind him isn't in this clip, and the area just doesn't seem quite as green as the final is. Next, Trouser just has one of those early corporate leaders with the test hat in the background. But for Rextro, he's shown in a completely different location compared to the retail build. So I guess we should probably slow down now because Dr. Puzz is up next and she's going to have a ton of changes. The first change is pretty obvious, the DN ray is on without having to be prompted to transform, as we've seen before. But there's some more differences with this ray that we haven't seen before. Like how the color of the pad's light ring is different, as it should be blue instead of that whiter color. And plus, when transforming, a giant puff of gray smoke obscures the player while the model switches. But the retail release uses a purple puff with blue light surrounding it instead, making it look more futuristic. Oh, and also on that ledge, there's supposed to be some snowman, but not in this build, I suppose. Near the end of the trailer, we get a brief look at a bunch of other characters super quickly, and really, only Claire's split-second interests me, as there's a crate, or I guess a lack of crates, in the background of this scene. The reveal of Shovel Knight that appears next is slightly different too, but at least more than Clara. It's got a camera angle that's pointing the opposite direction from the final, and the dialogue that's shown on screen has a few removed lines as well as a few extra ones. Though, you know, this text could have just been edited for the trailer, but I figured better show it than get a comment about it, am I right? So please, take a look. Okay, so this is the last video clip we've got to look at. Gameplay of the PS4 version of Yooka-Laylee, played by Andy Robinson and Chris Sutherland for PlayStation Access, and revealed about the same time as the character trailer we just looked at. Now, despite this gameplay footage being roughly 25 minutes long, there's actually a lot of the same differences that we've already seen. Still, what we haven't seen yet is incredibly interesting, and I feel we've got to look at it. The first thing I notice is Trouser, who's in the completely wrong spot, right at the start of the world instead of in the temple. But here's the thing, he's also in the temple too. Definitely not in the same place, but still, he's roughly where he's supposed to be. But that's not all. He can also be found near Cardos as well. Man, Trouser really gets around in this early version, and according to Andy, this was done in order to help guide people through the demo, and was not meant to be this way in the final release. Oh, and since we're near Cardos anyway, his minecart challenge has one more change. And technically it was in some footage that we saw earlier, but I didn't mention it at the time because we couldn't really get a good look at it until now. Notice that at the end of the track, Cardos stops way later in the early builds compared to the final. Heck, he almost falls off the track. Somewhat near this area is one change that I'd like to briefly mention. This button, which is turned like a diamond in this build, but is more like a square in the final. Did I really have to mention that? Yes. Yes, I did. In the same way, Yooka-Laylee's conversation with the torn Pagey here only has a single difference too, Laylee's last line. It's a small change, but I still think it's worth mentioning. Rextro has some better changes for sure though. Like, how he's not even here? Another just for the demo change? Yes indeedy. Andy said that himself in the video, saying that it wasn't in this build. I guess they just wanted to keep this mini arcade game a secret at the time, because not only is he not present in this build so you can't play it, but the logo for the game itself isn't even on the arcade screen, though it does show it in the final. Another just for the demo change is the pause menu. When you put it on screen, you should notice the return to hub and quit to main menu options are gone, duh, and in its place there's a restart level button that was just used for the demo. You know, I feel like we've talked about Dr. Puzz and her DN array a ton in this video, but lo and behold, we've got even more changes related to it. First, the molecule has a corplet near it, which isn't in the final, but he slams it off into space-time, so we don't have to worry too much about that. But once you've got it and bring it to Dr. Puzz, she does say something different, which I recommend taking a look at. After this, you should notice that the DN ray looks slightly different, with the tip being gray instead of using the color Grandis. And yes, I went to the trouble of finding the exact color. The color of the pad is different too, as we saw earlier in the character trailer, and upon closer inspection, it looks to be using Grandis 2 instead of blue. And when stepping on the pad, a real different icon shows up since this is on the PS4. But here's the thing. Even the PS4 uses the default green arrow in the final to let the player know that they can press the action button to activate something. So this early icon was removed in the end. Now when activating the ray in this build, it doesn't play the about to transform animation for Yooka-Laylee, and that unused huge puff of smoke reveals the new transformation without Dr. Puzz saying a word. After all, this was the first time transforming in this world. Dr. Puzz should have said something about how unexpected it was, but nope, she just stays silent. But not that plant that has the hots for them now. Except, remember how the plant says it wants nothing to do with you before transforming? Turns out the plant is even more of a jerk in this build, if you're not a plant already. Look at that.
What a freaking douche canoe. Hey, wait a second. I just noticed something. That plant's eyes are jumping? That can't be right. The final doesn't do that at all. Oh wait, that animation is the same as the idle animation for the eyeball enemies. So all along, the NPC plants were just eyeball enemies slapped on a normal plant, and in this build, they didn't even have a special animation for them. So they just reused the eyeball enemy's idle animation until they made a specific one for the final version. Very interesting.
Okay, let's move 3 months down the road now to December 12th, 2016. That was the day Playtonic finally revealed the release date of Yooka-Laylee, April 11th, 2017. Just a few months away. And then they dropped a bombshell. The game would not be appearing on the Wii U as expected. Why? Here's the deal. Yooka-Laylee is made in Unity, right? Unity requires a butt-ton of resources to run. Believe me, I know. And as they kept adding more into the game, it just kept getting worse and worse. And I know there are people who will say, well, then just optimize it. If Nintendo can put Breath of the Wild on the Wii U, Yooka-Laylee can surely make it on there. And while yes, optimizing is for sure needed in game development, there's only so much you can do with a game engine like Unity. Nintendo games are typically made with an engine specifically designed for that game, so they have the ability to do more optimizations. Not to mention they have the money, people, time, and resources to do all of that. Playtonic, despite having an all-star team, is still a relatively small group of people. Add all that together and I completely agree. Moving on to the Nintendo Switch was the best choice and pretty much the only choice that had to be made, no matter how hard it was to do.
After all, they kept trying up until 1 month before the game was finished. Now that's dedication. And speaking of finishing the game, on January 30th, 2017, roughly 2 years after Playtonic first took the place of Minji Django, ultimately revealing themselves to the world, Yooka-Laylee finally went gold. There was no stopping it now. Less than 3 months later, we all got our hands on the game, and I have to agree, it was completely worth the wait. Congrats, Playtonic. You did exactly what you set out to do, and I couldn't be happier. With the game's release, a digital manual and art book was also given out to the purchasers. The art book portion is what I find to be especially interesting, so let's go through all of it, starting with Yooka and Laylee. Now, remember a while ago I mentioned that Yooka was originally designed after a lion, but was deemed too heroic in that state? Well, we've got some concept art for that right here, along with an early version of Yooka as a chameleon as well. By the way, interesting fact, this artwork of Yooka as a lion was shown off on one of the slides Playtonic used at EGX Res 2015, or at least a silhouette of it, see? Now, moving on to the other half of the duo, it turns out most of this page in the art book is dedicated to Laylee's many design iterations. Looking at them all, it seems most of the changes revolved around her nose, which ended up being, as the book put it, a slightly controversial design choice in the end. Next up is Dr. Pudz, which compared to the rest of the characters we're going to look at, didn't change quite as much. Especially not as much as Cardo's. Look at how much this guy changed. Heck, a lot of these look like they're straight out of an old cartoon. I especially like the one with the handlebar mustache. What a refined gentleman. Vendy's early design also looks like it's out of some old cartoon, and originally she had 4 feet instead of 2. Also, I don't know why, but this is slightly creeping me out. So let's move on to the Knights of Hamelot, whose names on the concept art seem to have changed more than the designs themselves. We've got Sir Shoot-A-Lot, whose name stayed roughly the same except for an additional S, Lady Load-A-Lot, who later became Lady Loots-A-Lot, Sir Munch-A-Lot changed to Sir Scots-A-Lot, and Lady Leap-A-Lot didn't change at all from this point. However, there's an even earlier piece of concept of hers, or should I say of his, because she was originally a he called Sir Bounce-A-Lot. Now, what about our pal Rextro64? How much did he change? And to that I say, quite a bit. Apparently at the beginning, he was just going to be a regular dinosaur who just so happened to be a major fanboy of all things 90s gaming. But eventually, he evolved into a 90s video game character himself, complete with a Donkey Kong tie that was eventually changed to a Playtonic coin. Moving on, let's check out some enemies, starting with Corporate Security, who went through a ton of revisions before landing on its final design. Some of the other designs actually resembled the World 4 boss Inept. Next is the Corplates and their concept art for various designs for each of the worlds. Something I found unexpectedly interesting is that apparently it's Dr. Quack's fault for all the different kinds of Corplates. To quote the book, it says that Dr. Quack performed a series of horrific and evil experiments on them, resulting in a variety of corporate henchmen that all blend in perfectly with their environment in each of the grand tomes. Wow, I feel so bad for the poor guys. Speaking of Dr. Quack, here's some early designs for him too. Needless to say, he changed quite a bit. From a brain in a fishbowl, to a Saturday morning cartoon villain, to a freaking tank, and everything in between. Still, I prefer his final design a lot. He's one of my favorite characters in the game after all. Last, and certainly least, we have Capital B, whose design stayed roughly the same except for his outfit and the hand he holds his cannon. Oh wait, how could I forget Trouser? I'm so sorry Trouser, my bad. His character actually started out on a single post-it note and looks pretty different from his final design. Originally he was going to only go through one leg of his pants and wear a sock at the end of his tail. There was also this fez thing that was being considered at the time, and not to mention, instead of using a long S in his words, he was originally going to talk with a TH instead, basically having a lisp. Now since we just finished looking at some early concept art, why not look at some early screenshots that are still being shown on Playtonic's official website for Yooka-Laylee. First off, a ton of these images show off the game's characters with camera and poses that you don't normally see in the game. And I admit, most of them are likely just done to get some nice screenshots. However, there are some that I believe truly do show off some early design choices. Like this one of Blasto, who's facing the completely opposite direction from the retail version, which you can compare right here. Plus, there's this screenshot which shows some of those eyeball enemies and some crates at the beginning of Hivory Towers, even though they were never there in the final game. Now, despite Yooka-Laylee being a fairly recent release when this video came out, people have already found some unused graphics in the game. I mean, I'm sure there's still many more to find too, but for right now, this is all that's been discovered. I recommend checking the cutting room floor for up-to-date findings on all things unused in Yooka-Laylee. Link in the description. So let's check out some of those findings, found less than a week after release. Okay, first off, let's start with some leftovers from the console version that are found in the PC build of this game. The first is the PS4's cross button, which is seen on the title screen of the PS4 version, obviously. And next is a temporary placeholder for the Xbox Live avatar that looks, interesting. Hey, maybe we'll see this vampire cowboy as a character in a future game then, huh? No, never mind, no, please no. Moving on, we've got some leftovers from the toy box build too, like these grids that textured most of the game. In fact, we've got a ton of grids that go unused in Yooka-Laylee. We've got gray ones with text, some that were designed for colliders and triggers, and some borders that were used to show the safe area of the screen, or in other words, the area that is for sure to be seen on pretty much all displays. But the most interesting unused graphic that was a leftover from the toy box has to be this early placeholder version of Dr. Quack's speech sprite. Now, there's a couple things I need to mention about this sprite. One, despite being a leftover from the toy box build, it was never used in the toy box either. And two, this is technically used in the final build of Yooka-Laylee, or more likely a duplicate of this sprite. You may not have noticed it before, but it's actually used in various games in Capital Casino, like the matching game, or when you have to memorize a pattern and hit the images in the correct order. That's where this prototype version was shown. Hey, can I go off track a bit? See that image of Rextro there? Now, I don't know for sure, but it really doesn't look like his normal speech sprite. More likely, it's a cutout from this piece of concept art that we saw earlier. It's not unused, but I just thought it was interesting. Okay, I'm sure you all know what I'm going to talk about now that we're nearing the end of the video. After all, this cut voice was one of the more controversial choices I've seen in video game development stories. I'm of course talking about the removal of JonTron's voice from the final version of Yooka-Laylee. Now, this video isn't going to be taking sides or even discussing whether or not this was a right or wrong choice. I'm simply going to talk about a removed asset from the game. In very basic terms, JonTron said some stuff, people weren't happy about said stuff, and so Playtonic removed his voice from the game via an update before release. When I first played Yooka-Laylee, it was a couple of weeks before release because I received an early copy, and that version I played included his voice. To make sure of this, I also checked the end credits of the game before and after the update. Sure enough, he was removed. But who did he voice? Well, it turns out it was this random bathroom guy who needs you to fix the pipes in order for him to flush the toilet. So allow me to show you a little before and after, so you can see the removed clip and the one that replaced it. But that's not all. We're not done yet. Because while I was writing the script, Jens, who's the technical director and software engineer at Playtonic, posted up a video on YouTube of an early prototype of the Yooka-Laylee title screen, which is incredibly cool. Just look at it. Turns out that this is the first ever prototype of the title screen. Jens says that this was made in a single afternoon so they could have something to test out the software with and to show artists at Playtonic how to set it all up. This is perhaps one of the coolest and creepiest looking title screens I have ever seen. Heck, it even rivals that canceled game Glover 2 with its horrific meat cottage. Ugh. This place comes with a white picket fence, a 3-story house complete with dining room, fully furnished bedroom, and a laundry room that doubles as a great music room. Not to mention a great outdoor shed for unwanted guests who show up for a room because they got kicked out of their apartment and you kinda have to give them a place to stay because they were a good friend of yours in college and you feel bad to have them sleep on a park bench. Oh, and you can also check how many quillies you've collected. Quillies? Wait, hold up. Quillies? Not quills? Interesting. Looks like we learned something new today. Quills were originally called quillies. I also like how Yuka's tail is terrifyingly long when unrolled. And please, give them back their sight. But we're still not quite done yet. Steve Burke, one of the composers of Yooka-Laylee's soundtrack, posted up on SoundCloud some unused tracks that were originally going to be used for Rextro's arcade games. The first, according to Steve himself, is an early version of the Gauntlet Run theme. Take a listen. Next up is a theme that Steve didn't bother developing past this point, though to me it kinda sounds like it could have been used for Cardo's karting, just because of the style of music and instruments that were used. See if you agree with me by comparing both. Okay, for the last two unused tracks, I couldn't seem to find any similarities with any of the final game's music. So take a listen to both of those tracks and feel free to comment what you think they might have eventually become. So that's the entire development of Yooka-Laylee. What a journey. From an idea that was never thought to be able to come to life, to a game that finally brought back what we were all waiting for, a 3D platformer with that classic Rare feel. Man, I am so excited to see what Playtonic will bring us in the future. Tooka-Laylee, Laylee Racing, Dr. Quack's Bad Feather Day? Only time will tell. And I think the gaming future looks bright now that Playtonic is here to stay. So this has been Beta64 with the development of Yooka-Laylee. Thanks for watching.